Humans are deeply social creatures, yet their behavior often shifts dramatically when they become part of a crowd. In groups, individuals can act in ways they wouldn't alone, sometimes losing their usual sense of personal responsibility. This powerful transformation is rooted in the psychological phenomenon known as deindividuation, where group identity begins to overshadow personal identity. As we explore this concept, understand that people often change when they feel invisible or anonymous within a collective, a shift that can unlock both positive and harmful behaviors. This introduction sets the stage for a deeper dive into how crowd psychology explains this subtle but profound change in human conduct. De-individuation is a psychological state where a person's sense of individual identity diminishes, often occurring in group settings. When people feel anonymous within a crowd, their normal self-awareness and personal accountability weaken. This loss of self can lead to behavior that is uncharacteristic or more impulsive than usual. In essence, as individual identity erodes, group identity takes precedence, allowing actions to be influenced more by the collective than by individual morals or social norms. Understanding this shift is key to comprehending why and how people sometimes act differently in crowds compared to alone. To understand de-individuation's roots, we trace back to early psychological theories in the 19th and 20th centuries. Pioneers like Gustave Le Bon explored how individuals behave differently when part of a crowd, often losing self-awareness and responsibility. This laid the foundation for the modern concept of de-individuation, emphasizing how anonymity and group immersion reduce personal accountability. Later, experimental research in social psychology began to systematically investigate these ideas, refining our grasp of how group identity alters individual behavior. When individuals enter a crowd, several key psychological processes alter their behavior. First is anonymity. Being part of a group can obscure personal identity, making people feel invisible and less accountable. Alongside this is diffusion of responsibility, where the collective presence dilutes individual blame for actions, reducing the internal checks on behavior. Finally, arousal intensifies emotional responses, amplifying impulsive and sometimes aggressive tendencies. Together, these factors dismantle normal self-regulation and pave the way for de-individuation, explaining why people act differently in crowds compared to alone. The Stanford Prison Experiment, conducted in 1971 by psychologist Philip Zimbardo, stands as a pivotal study revealing how ordinary people can adopt abusive roles when placed within oppressive group dynamics. Participants were randomly assigned as guards or prisoners, creating a simulated prison environment that quickly escalated beyond expectations. This experiment powerfully demonstrated how social roles and group identity can dissolve individual moral boundaries, leading to behaviors unthinkable in normal circumstances. The Stanford Prison Experiment involved 24 male college students randomly assigned to play two roles, guards or prisoners. The participants were placed in a mock prison environment carefully constructed in the basement of a university building. The guards received uniforms, mirrored sunglasses, and batons, while the prisoners wore smocks and identification numbers. This controlled setting created a clear power hierarchy designed to simulate real prison dynamics, allowing researchers to observe behavioral changes as roles were enacted. In the Stanford Prison Experiment, anonymity and assigned group roles profoundly altered individual behavior, as participants donned uniforms and assumed identities of guards or prisoners. Their personal accountability blurred, leading to de-individuation. This psychological condition diminished self-awareness and self-restraint, allowing behaviors that defied their usual moral standards. The guards, feeling masked by roles and uniforms, adopted increasingly authoritarian and abusive actions, while prisoners became passive or rebellious, illustrating how group identity can suppress personal ethics and promote conformity to the assigned social role. The Stanford Prison Experiment revealed stark psychological transformations, illustrating how situational forces overpower personal identity. Participants rapidly adopted assigned roles of guards or prisoners, showing increased aggression or submission. Psychologists interpret this as a vivid example of deindividuation, where individuals lose self-awareness and accountability in group roles, leading to behavior they might not display alone. This shift stems from anonymity within the group and perceived shared identity, which weakens personal moral constraints. The experiment's insights extend beyond the lab, explaining how ordinary people engage in harmful behavior when immersed in certain group contexts, losing their usual ethical boundaries.
While the Stanford Prison Experiment powerfully demonstrated the potential for deindividuation, it has not escaped criticism and alternative interpretations. Critics argue that the experiment suffered from methodological flaws, including the influence of demand characteristics. Participants may have simply acted how they thought was expected. Additionally, ethical concerns highlighted the psychological harm caused to participants, questioning the validity of the findings. Alternative views suggest that rather than de-individuation alone driving behavior, factors such as social roles, compliance to perceived authority, and group norms also significantly shaped actions. These perspectives encourage us to consider a more nuanced picture of how group identity interacts with individual psychology, cautioning against attributing behavior changes solely to loss of self-awareness. Recent research has expanded our understanding of de-individuation, examining how anonymity and group immersion influence behavior in various contexts. Studies have shown that when individuals feel less identifiable, their self-awareness diminishes, reducing adherence to personal and social norms. This dynamic sometimes leads to increased impulsivity or aggression, but recent findings also highlight conditions where group identity can encourage pro-social actions. Additionally, nuanced research explores how digital environments amplify de-individuation effects, altering interactions on social media platforms. These contemporary studies challenge earlier assumptions by revealing that outcomes of de-individuation are complex, dependent largely on group norms and situational cues, rather than a simple loss of accountability. De-individuation provides a key lens for understanding why individuals often act differently within large groups, such as crowds in riots or protests. When people feel anonymous and lose their sense of personal identity, they may engage in behaviors they would normally avoid, like vandalism or aggression, because their individual accountability diminishes. This loss of self-awareness, combined with heightened arousal and group influence, creates a potent psychological state that fuels mob mentality. Historical and contemporary events repeatedly show how crowds can shift from peaceful assemblies to chaotic, destructive mobs, highlighting the powerful role that de-individuation plays in dissolving personal responsibility and increasing impulsive, sometimes harmful actions. In the digital age, anonymity on social media platforms creates a new form of de-individuation. Behind screens, people lose physical identity cues, which reduces personal accountability and emboldens behavior that might be restrained in face-to-face interactions. The feeling of invisibility online can encourage group conformity and amplify extreme reactions as individuals feel shielded by the crowd's digital mask. This virtual crowd, while less tangible, exercises similar psychological effects, making personal responsibility diffuse across an expanding network of unseen others. Consequently, online group dynamics reveal how the erosion of individual identity underlies not only physical crowd behavior, but also the digital sphere's social contagion and impulsivity. When individuals identify strongly with a group, their personal sense of moral judgment often fades into the background. This psychological shift, known as deindividuation, reduces self-awareness and heightens feelings of anonymity within the crowd. As a result, people become less conscious of the consequences of their actions and feel less accountable for them. This erosion of individuality makes it easier for individuals to conform to group norms, even when those norms conflict with their own ethics. Essentially, as group identity takes precedence, personal responsibility diminishes, leading to behaviors that might be surprising or out of character when done alone. When individuals enter large groups, a psychological shift often occurs. Personal identities seem to dissolve into the collective. This process, known as deindividuation, strips away self-awareness and personal accountability, leading people to act in ways they normally wouldn't alone. Imagine a person gradually donning a symbolic mask, blending with shadows and shapes around them, representing how anonymity in crowds diminishes individual distinctiveness. This loss makes it easier to engage in impulsive, sometimes destructive group behavior. Visually, we can capture this as the anchor character's clear face begins to obscure, merging softly into the crowd, symbolizing the fading of personal traits. As the scene progresses, these masked faces and shifting forms illustrate the erosion of self-control, highlighting how group identity can override personal values, paving the way for actions driven more by the mass mentality than by individual conviction. De-individuation intensifies when certain factors converge, weakening personal accountability in crowds. First, size matters. Larger groups create a sensation of invisibility, diffusing responsibility among more people. The anonymous presence within a mass, often enhanced by physical concealment like clothing or masks, further obscures individual identity, making actions feel less personally traceable. Lastly, heightened arousal, whether from emotional excitement, stress, or sensory overload, primes individuals to respond impulsively rather than reflectively, deepening the surrender to group influence. Together, these factors amplify the psychological state where self-awareness diminishes, enabling behaviors that might contradict personal norms or values. When we observe changes in behavior within groups, it's tempting to attribute these shifts to inherent personality traits, what psychologists call dispositional explanations. However, situational explanations hold that the context and environment heavily influence how people act. For instance, a normally calm individual may exhibit aggressive behavior when immersed in a crowd that encourages anonymity and collective emotion. This shift illustrates how group dynamics can overshadow personal identity, leading individuals to act contrary to their usual disposition. Understanding this distinction is key to grasping how crowd psychology operates and why accountability often feels diffused in group settings. Authority and hierarchical structures within groups profoundly shape individual actions. When commands flow from a perceived legitimate source, personal responsibility often diminishes. Individuals may comply with directives that conflict with their moral compass because the chain of authority diffuses accountability. This effect was dramatically evident in the Stanford Prison Experiment, where participants adopted assigned roles and obeyed established hierarchies, leading to behaviors they normally wouldn't exhibit. Understanding this dynamic helps explain how group structures facilitate shifts from personal agency to conformity under pressure. One of the most revealing explorations of crowd psychology is Stanley Milgram's obedience studies, which demonstrated how ordinary individuals comply with authority, often against their moral compass. The power of an authoritative figure can override personal accountability, amplifying the de-individuation effect. Participants obeyed commands to administer what they believed were painful shocks, revealing how group or authority contexts diminish individual responsibility. This aligns with crowd behavior, where authority structures can intensify conformity and erode personal ethics, making it easier for individuals to act in ways contrary to their usual values. When individuals become part of a crowd, psychological mechanisms kick in that allow them to justify actions they would normally find unacceptable. This process, known as moral disengagement, involves diffusing personal responsibility across the group, minimizing the harm caused, and blaming the victims or the situation. As accountability diminishes, people alter their moral compass, rationalizing behaviors like aggression or cruelty as permissible within the group context. This shift enables actions that would otherwise conflict with personal values, revealing how group dynamics can erode ethical constraints. In the heart of a crowd, individuals face a silent battle between their own identity and the overwhelming force of the group. This inner struggle emerges as personal accountability fades, giving way to the collective's pull. The anchor character stands visibly torn, their facial expression revealing uncertainty and tension. Around them, the crowd shapes and symbols hint at the relentless pressure to conform and lose oneself. As this tension heightens, the anchor's body language shifts, embodying the profound psychological conflict where self-awareness clashes with de-individuation. This moment captures the fragile boundary between maintaining individuality and succumbing to group dynamics, illustrating how social environments can alter personal behavior at a deep psychological level. As we delve deeper into crowd psychology, visualizing the invisible forces shaping group behavior becomes essential. Imagine societal pressure as sharp arrows converging toward the individual, symbolizing expectations, judgments, and norms that compel conformity. These arrows form barriers around our anchor character, representing the constraints limiting personal freedom and accountability within the group context. The barriers emerge as stylized geometric walls and symbolic chains, embodying how group identity can erode self-awareness and individuality. In this scene, the anchor character's expression reveals tension and conflict, caught between personal values and the overwhelming collective pressure. This visual metaphor highlights how deeply ingrained mechanisms can push individuals to align their actions with the crowd, often at the cost of moral responsibility. As these constraints tighten visually around the person, viewers perceive the subtle but powerful dynamics that facilitate de-individuation, allowing group identity to dissolve personal accountability. As the crowd's influence grows, our anchor character's expression reveals an internal battle. A flicker of uncertainty shadows their eyes, reflecting the tension between individual values and the group's overwhelming force. They appear increasingly consumed by the collective energy, struggling to maintain a sense of self amidst mounting pressure. In the second half, this internal conflict deepens. The character's gaze shifts downward, shoulders tense, embodying the erosion of personal accountability. Surrounded by symbolic figures and arrows pointing inward, the visual echoes their fading identity, illustrating the profound psychological impact of de-individuation in the crowd dynamic. Understanding de-individuation offers critical insights into preventing harmful group behaviors. When individuals lose their personal identity within a crowd, they may act in ways they wouldn't alone, lowering accountability and increasing impulsivity. Recognizing these dynamics allows communities and leaders to design environments that preserve individuality and promote responsibility, helping to curb destructive collective behavior. By fostering awareness of these psychological shifts, societies can implement safeguards, such as clear role definitions and accountability measures, that reduce the risk of violence or misconduct arising from group anonymity. As individuals and groups experience de-individuation, anonymity clouds their sense of personal responsibility, often leading to impulsive or unethical behavior. However, psychological research suggests that re-establishing self-awareness can counteract these effects. Techniques such as self-monitoring, clear role assignments, and public accountability make individuals more conscious of their actions within groups. Social interventions like naming people, encouraging reflection, and creating transparent group norms remind members that they are seen and judged as individuals, not just faceless parts of a crowd. By anchoring personal identity amidst collective dynamics, these strategies restore moral judgment and help prevent negative behaviors that emerge when accountability fades. While group dynamics often encourage a loss of individual identity, self-awareness stands as a powerful countermeasure to deindividuation. When individuals engage in reflection, recognizing their personal values, responsibilities, and emotions, they regain a sense of accountability even within a crowd. This internal dialogue acts like a mental anchor, allowing people to resist impulsive group behavior and maintain moral standards. Understanding this, psychologists emphasize techniques that boost individual self-awareness, such as mindfulness and deliberate perspective-taking, to mitigate the negative effects of group anonymity and prevent destructive collective actions. When exploring group dynamics, we must confront the ethical dilemmas inherent in manipulating group identity and personal responsibility. Experimentally inducing deindividuation can reveal behavioral shifts, yet it risks infringing on individual autonomy and dignity. Researchers and practitioners alike face the challenge of balancing insight with respect, ensuring that interventions or studies do not foster harm or exploit vulnerability. Understanding these ethical boundaries is crucial in responsibly applying knowledge about group behavior and its potent psychological effects. Understanding deindividuation has practical applications beyond theory, especially in education and law enforcement. In schools, fostering individual recognition and accountability can reduce bullying and violent incidents, as students are less likely to lose their sense of self when they feel seen. Similarly, police forces apply crowd psychology principles to manage large gatherings effectively, preventing escalation by encouraging personal responsibility and avoiding anonymity, which often triggers deindividuation. These strategies help transform potentially volatile group situations into safer, more controlled environments, demonstrating how psychological insights inform real-world interventions. While deindividuation theory offers insights into how group settings can diminish personal accountability and alter behavior, it is not without its limitations. Critics argue that the theory sometimes overgeneralizes, failing to explain why not all individuals and groups act impulsively or aggressively. Furthermore, subsequent research has uncovered contradictory findings where increased self-awareness and group norms can suppress, rather than encourage, such behaviors. This complexity suggests that deindividuation is only one piece of a larger puzzle in understanding group behavior. Deindividuation deepens our understanding of group behavior by intersecting with broader psychological models like conformity, obedience, and social identity theory. While deindividuation explains loss of self-awareness and accountability in crowds, conformity focuses on the influence of group norms shaping individual actions. Obedience highlights how authority figures can intensify this dynamic, compelling people to follow orders they might otherwise question. Social identity theory ties these concepts together by showing how personal identity shifts toward collective identity within groups, amplifying the power of social pressure. Together, these frameworks reveal the complex layers that drive individuals to act differently when embedded in groups, where personal responsibility can dissipate and collective forces take precedence. To conclude our exploration of crowd psychology and deindividuation, let's recap the essential elements we've covered. Deindividuation occurs when individuals in a group lose their sense of personal identity and accountability, often leading to altered or intensified behaviors. Classic studies like the Stanford Prison Experiment dramatically showcased how group dynamics and assigned roles can erode moral boundaries, fostering behaviors one might never exhibit alone. We've examined how group behavior arises from this shift, driven by anonymity, diffusion of responsibility, and heightened emotional arousal. Understanding these mechanisms helps explain why good people sometimes act in harmful ways within crowds or groups. Recognizing these psychological processes not only deepens our comprehension of human behavior, but also highlights the importance of fostering personal awareness and accountability in social settings to counteract negative influences of group identity. As we reach this moment, take a pause and reflect on your own life. Have you ever found yourself acting differently simply because you were part of a group? Perhaps in a crowd or at a social gathering, you felt your usual self fade, replaced by behaviors you wouldn't normally choose alone. This shift is at the heart of deindividuation, where personal identity blurs within the collective. Understanding these moments helps us see how group dynamics can subtly reshape actions, sometimes leading to surprising or uncharacteristic behaviors. By recognizing these influences, we start to grasp the power groups wield over individual accountability and decision-making. As we conclude this journey through the mechanisms of deindividuation and crowd psychology, it's crucial to bring awareness back to our own actions within groups. Recognizing how group identity can dilute personal accountability empowers us to reclaim our individuality, even in the midst of collective influence. By consciously participating and maintaining self-awareness, we resist the unconscious pull toward losing ourselves in the crowd. This responsibility starts with reflecting on our behaviors and the subtle pressures that shape them. Embracing accountability isn't just about personal morality. It's a vital step in fostering healthier social environments where ethical group behavior can thrive. Remember, the power to stand out is also the power to change what happens within any crowd we belong to. As we conclude our exploration of how group identity diminishes personal accountability, let's look ahead. Upcoming videos will dive into obedience studies, highlighting how authority can intensify group influence and compliance. We'll also examine historical social psychology cases, including the psychological mechanisms behind regimes that exploited crowd behavior. These topics provide deeper insight into why good people sometimes do bad things, building on what you've learned so far. As we conclude, imagine the anchor character standing at the center of a fragmented crowd, each figure representing pieces of lost identity, masked and blurred to symbolize the erasure from individual accountability. Slowly, the masks begin to lift, signifying a reclaiming of personal responsibility and self-awareness within the group context. This powerful visual encapsulates both the danger of losing oneself in the crowd and the hopeful potential to reassert individuality despite social pressures. Reflecting on these tensions invites us to consciously recognize and resist the forces that dissolve our personal identity in group settings. As we conclude our exploration of deindividuation and crowd psychology, it's essential to acknowledge the foundational research and sources that shape this discussion. Key studies like the Stanford Prison Experiment and classic theories on group behavior provide deep insights into how personal accountability fades within crowds. For further reading, explore works by Philip Zimbardo, Gustave Le Bon, and later analyses on social identity and conformity. We also want to thank all researchers whose efforts illuminate the complexities of human behavior in groups. These resources offer critical perspectives for anyone wishing to deepen their understanding of why good people sometimes do bad things within the dynamics of crowd influence. We encourage you to reflect on these insights and consider their implications in your social environments and personal experiences. When exploring group identity and deindividuation, ethical concerns inevitably arise. Researchers must carefully consider the moral implications of manipulating participants' sense of self and responsibility. These experiments can reveal how anonymity and group immersion diminish personal accountability, sometimes leading subjects to act contrary to their usual values. Ethically conducting such studies demands strict safeguards, informed consent, and debriefings to mitigate psychological harm. Beyond research, understanding these dynamics calls for caution when influencing group behavior in real-world settings. The balance between harnessing social cohesion and respecting individual dignity is delicate and essential. Understanding deindividuation's influence enables practical improvements in societal settings such as education and policing. In schools, fostering individual identity within groups helps reduce peer pressure that leads to negative behavior. Specialized training for law enforcement integrates crowd psychology insights to prevent escalation and maintain order without unnecessary force. These applications highlight how conscious awareness of group dynamics can foster safer, more accountable environments, balancing collective identity with personal responsibility in real-world interactions. While deindividuation theory offers a compelling explanation for how anonymity influences behavior within groups, it has notable limitations. Research has shown contradictory findings where increased anonymity did not always result in antisocial or aggressive actions. Some studies highlight that situational factors, group norms, and individual traits also play crucial roles. Therefore, deindividuation alone cannot fully explain the complexity of crowd behavior or personal accountability loss. This invites a more nuanced approach that considers multiple psychological mechanisms working together, rather than relying solely on the concept of deindividuation. To fully grasp deindividuation, we must link it to broader frameworks of social psychology that explain human behavior in groups. Conformity shows how individuals shift actions to align with group norms, often suppressing personal judgment. Obedience reveals how authority figures govern behavior, sometimes compelling actions against personal ethics. Finally, social identity theory explains how people derive self-concept from group membership, strengthening in-group cohesion but also diminishing personal accountability. Together, these models illustrate a powerful psychological cascade. As group identity intensifies, personal responsibility fades, making deindividuation a critical piece of the puzzle. This synthesis helps explain why ordinary individuals can participate in extraordinary group behaviors, bridging experimental findings and real-world phenomena. Let's recap the core insights we've explored about crowd psychology and deindividuation. We define deindividuation as the psychological state where individuals lose their self-awareness and personal accountability within a group, leading to behavior they might not exhibit alone. Historic experiments, notably the Stanford Prison Experiment, starkly demonstrated how quickly roles and group dynamics overwhelm individual identity, prompting profound behavioral shifts. We also examined the mechanisms behind this. Reduced self-evaluation, anonymity, and a heightened sense of group identity all play critical roles in dissolving personal responsibility. Despite its explanatory power, the theory has limits and faces critiques, especially regarding the variability of crowd behavior and individual differences. Importantly, understanding these psychological processes urges caution and reflection about how we participate in groups and the morality that can shift under social pressure. Now that we understand how deindividuation diminishes personal accountability within groups, take a moment to reflect on your own experiences. Recall times when you felt swept up in group energy, perhaps conforming to behaviors you wouldn't exhibit alone. Notice how the presence of others can subtly alter actions and choices, leading us to act differently than our usual selves. This personal reflection highlights how deeply group dynamics influence individual behavior, often outside of conscious awareness. Recognizing these moments is the first step toward understanding the power of crowd psychology in our daily lives. As we conclude our journey into the depths of crowd psychology, It's essential to bring awareness to a powerful truth. Our behavior in groups is not just automatic, it is within our control. When we understand how deindividuation can diminish personal accountability, we gain the ability to pause and reflect before acting in social settings. Becoming consciously aware of our tendency to merge into a crowd identity empowers us to maintain our moral compass and resist negative impulses. This awareness is the first step toward fostering environments where individuality and responsibility thrive, even amid strong social pressure. Reflect on your own experiences. How often have you unconsciously shifted your behavior because of the group? The call to action is clear. Actively participate in groups with mindfulness and courage, reclaim your personal accountability, and influence the collective for the better. By doing so, we can break cycles of harmful group behavior and create spaces where good people choose to do good things.